Well, good day, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk about value drivers and why, if you're undertaking a value acceleration program, why you care about value drivers and how you're going to analyze them and how you can use them to improve the value of your business. Okay, so before I get too far into this, here's some administration. So if you're interested in these type of topics, please subscribe to my channel. Just press the subscribe button. And we have a new newsletter coming out in May. So right now it's going to be a bi-monthly, but I think maybe in the fall I might move it to monthly. But if you're interested in our newsletter, please sign up for it. The description's in the description. So let's start off and talk about what are value drivers. So I've mentioned before a very simplified formula for the value of a business is going to be a benefit stream times the multiple. And the benefit stream in many cases is going to be earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, or EBITDA. Sometimes it could be other things such as seller's discretionary earnings. For smaller businesses, could be EBIT, which is earnings before interest and taxes, and that would be for perhaps a business that's not very asset intensive. And if you've ever seen a formal valuation report, there's something we call free cash flow, or sometimes called net discretionary cash flow. That is a more complicated version of a cash flow that is that incorporates working capital and incorporates CapEx. Okay, so that's one side of the equation. That's the benefit stream. The multiple is a function of, the long-term sustainable growth rate of the business and the risk of the business, factoring in, the risk of equity, holding equity, industry risk, etc., and company-specific risk. So any sort of value acceleration program, its main objective is to help the business either grow, reduce risk, or in most cases, we're going to address both. Okay? So the objective is to grow and de-risk the business over time in a strategic way. And the reason I say over time is because you need runway to improve your business. It's not like selling a house where you put some window dressing in and fresh coat of paint and voila, it's ready to go. Because prospective purchasers will see through that. What they like to see is a business that has systems and processes that are separated from the owner, that a business that is predictable, business has recurring revenue. We're going to talk about that. So over time, in a strategic way. And by strategic way, what I'm referring to is that there's many things that you can do to improve your business. The question is what is the priority? What order are you going to do things? Are some of them kind of dependent on the other? And your approach could be you want to get the easy victory, so the low-hanging fruit, quick wins. Your philosophy could be that you have one gigantic rock that you need to address before you can worry about anything else. So there's a lot of different ways of approaching it. more bang for your buck. That could be your strategy right there. Try to get the drivers that will have the greatest impact on the value of your business. So a lot of different ways of approaching it. They're all good. Just depends on what your time frame is, what your priorities are as an owner, etc. So let's talk about some of these drivers, and so I tend to look at these drivers in both, which ones influence growth and which ones influence the de-risking of the business. Now, it's important to understand that just because something's addressing growth doesn't mean it doesn't also necessarily address the de-risking of the business, and vice versa. So some of the de-risking ones that we'll talk about could also be beneficial towards growth. But I think some of these drivers tend to influence one over the other a little bit more. So this is how I've kind of divided them. So we're going to first talk about consistency of cash flows. And why is that important to a prospective purchaser? All right, so when we're talking about consistency of cash flows, we're referring to the ability of a business to generate consistent levels of revenue, consistent margins, or at least there's a trend that's consistent if it's improving. But sometimes, if revenue is all over the place, like, 1 year they make $1 million, and the next year they make $500,000, and the next year they make $750,000, and then they make $800,000, and then they go back down to $400,000. That's a very inconsistent business. And not only does it make it tougher to value, it also makes that business less appealing to a prospective purchaser. Okay, so even if you could convince a prospective purchaser to buy the business, they're going to factor that into their valuation because there's a lot of risk there. As opposed to a business where they consistently, maybe they don't make $1 million a year, but maybe they only make 600, but it's consistent year in, year out. Or there's a consistent growth rate. Like every year they're up 5%. And have a long track record. That's something that's valuable. We also are concerned about predictability of cash flows. And a good example of a business that has very low predictability would be a business that runs on projects. And let's just assume these projects are relatively short in span. Let's say they're only 3 months long. Don't know what they're doing, but they're doing projects that are only 3 months long. So conceivably, they could go from very busy to having no revenue coming in at all in a short period of time. That is a type of business that does not have any sort of predictability of cash flows. Especially if these are projects that are kind of like one and done projects, where let's just say you help them with something, or you're selling them something, but then they never need to come back to you again. That is an example of something where it's like a one and done type of situation, or it's very rarely that they're going to come back. So the problem is that you're constantly working to dig up new business. And that's very difficult. And as we know, the cost of getting a new customer is a lot more expensive than retaining an existing one. So that means you're spending a lot of time and effort constantly looking for new business. And it's difficult. And so a prospective purchaser who comes along and sees that, there's no contracts, or the relationships are very short term in nature. That's a very risky business. So again, that's going to impact the transferability, and that is going to impact the valuation of the business. One of the other things that we would be concerned about would be cash flows versus industry peers. So in other words, what's the performance of the business versus what's going on in industry? And what we're looking for when we ask these questions is we want to know, is this business, is it average? Is it below average? Is it above average? Is it best in class? Is it worst in class? Because these are all different states that are going to influence, again, how someone's going to value the business. Somebody might be willing to pay more for a business that's above average, consistently above average. And they may pay even bigger premium when it comes to buying a best-in-class business. There are certain examples out there where someone's going to pay a big premium for best-in-class. On the other end of the spectrum, if you have, below average business, that's going to impact the valuation. And if you have something that's almost kind of worse in class, it may not be transferable. So this is why those things are important. Now, market factors are something that may be outside your control, but they're still important, and they're still an important factor of evaluation and what goes into the value of a business. And there's a big difference between a business that operates in sort of some new emerging technology or emerging product, let's say in the startup phase, versus, say, a growth phase, which is where, okay, the product's established, but we're in a high growth phase, versus a mature industry where, things like cost containment and product differentiation are extremely important. And then, at the very end of the spectrum, we have a sunset industry where it'd be very challenging from a valuation perspective, because the question is, to the prospective purchaser is what are they buying that's of value? And again, we would have to assess, if it's a sunset industry, an industry in decline, is it going to be a long, slow decline? Or maybe there's still some value in the business just simply because of cash flows? Or is it something that's this is going to be obsolete in a year or two, and revenues are going to disappear? So other things that we would concern ourselves with would be, for example, market share. Do we have a big market share? How do we compete? Are we competing nationally? Are we competing locally? There's many businesses that are going to compete locally, but they have a relatively large share of that local market. Maybe they're operating in a certain sphere that's very particular, where there's really not a lot of competitors. And maybe they can operate quite well in that particular sphere. Other things that we would look about on the growth side would be use of intangible property, such as branding. Branding is important because branding can represent quality, can represent integrity, represent our values, and also idealistically tells the customer, prospect, what to expect. Now, for a lot of smaller businesses, branding's a tougher exercise, but still could be important for many middle market businesses. So, what kind of tools can we use to help us assess these drivers on the growth side, and tools that maybe can help us actually grow the business? So, number one, I'll start off with the business valuation is incredibly important. And sometimes people ask, should you get a business valuation done every year? And I think if you are part of a value acceleration program where you want to grow with an exit in mind, that valuation is important and should be done every year because it's giving you information about where you are on your journey. Okay? And really, if you've never had a business valuation done, it's very useful because it's going to give you some ideas about what really drives the value of your business and what you can do about it. Now, there's some other strategic things that can be done, other tools such as Porter's 5 Forces. Porter's, if you're not familiar with that, that is a tool that is used to analyze the various market forces that work against a company, such as supplier power, customer power. We want to know competitive, how competitive our the industry in which we compete is. What are the barriers to entry? How easy is it to substitute to another product? So if our pricing gets a little too much, is it easy for someone to just say, you know what, I'm gonna go down the street. I'll get the same thing that I need cheaper. So, and it's a strategic exercise to help you assess how you're going to run your business, how you're going to do pricing, how you're going to compete. Okay, so it's a very involved process, but it's extremely powerful. Now, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And on the growth side, we're mostly concerned with strengths and opportunities. Strengths are internal characteristics. So what do we do well? What's our competitive advantage? What's our unique selling proposition? Opportunities are things that we can do, that there may be trends in industry that we could take advantage of to increase our business. And on the other side of the equation, the weaknesses and the threats, these are more, I would rank them as more de-risking things because those are activities which are trying to prevent a negative. Benchmarking is important. I mentioned to you, we want to understand how we're doing compared to peers. So benchmarking is very important, and it's important in evaluation. Ratio analysis is important. It's going to tell us a lot about operational efficiency, financial efficiency, risk in terms of there's something called the Altman Z-score, so you can measure the relative risk of going bankrupt. So ratios can be very powerful and tell us a lot about how a business is performing. Debt capacity analysis is important as well because some businesses may be over-levered, but there's many businesses probably in the middle market who are under-levered or not taking full advantage of debt. And again, that may be fine during normal times, but I think if you're undertaking a value acceleration program, you might want to consider that debt is one option to use to fund some of the investments that you're going to have to make to improve the business. And whether that's the capital side or bringing in people, doesn't really matter. But there may be some money that you need to invest, instead of distributing it out to yourself through dividends or bonuses, you're going to reinvest it into the business with the objective of increasing the multiple. Okay? And financial forecasting is also important because if your business is going to be valued based on cash flow and you're trying to grow your business, or you're trying to successfully exit your business, you need to know what's going on with your cash flows. You need to know, is there turbulence ahead? You need to know, if you set the goal of, I want to double my valuation in the next 5 years. Okay. So do a financial forecast that's going to support that doubling of growth, and then ask yourself, how are you going to get there? Because you can't just cross your fingers and hope that you're going to double your growth. You need to measure it along the way. So having a grip on what's going on with your financials is important. So let's move on to de-risking. And what is de-risking about? So de-risking is a little bit less interesting than on the growth side, but nonetheless, just as important to improving the value of your business. So here's some of the things that we might focus in on. So, for example, do you have documentations of systems and processes, not just for operations, but for all the functions? So I think there's two objectives here. Number one, the reason we want to do this is because could a prospective purchaser understand your business in a holistic sense and take it over? Is it turnkey? The more turnkey your business is, the more transferable it is. If everything is stuck up in the owner's head, how is someone supposed to take over your business, even understand the business? Like, prospective purchaser doesn't want to take over your business and take a year to kind of like figure it out. They want to get the benefit of the owner's knowledge of the business and have it documented in such a way that they can understand it. Now, the other thing that's important in documentation is when it comes to employees. Do the employees understand the processes? If an employee leaves and someone else comes in, can they come and take over that job? Or is it very difficult? Is there a long kind of lead up period for them to learn their job? Okay. Can the owner take a vacation and go away for 1 or 2 weeks without the entire business falling apart? If the owner can't do that, then there's a problem there. Other things include diversification of customers and suppliers. So I added suppliers in because I think we inherently understand why we'd want to diversify customers. But just to elaborate on that, obviously, if you have 50% of your revenues coming in from 3 or 4 customers, that's a very concentrated situation. If one of them leaves, then your revenues are going to have a big drop, and so are your margins. And you very easily can go from a profitable situation to one where you're losing money. Suppliers are also important because, again, if you're over-reliant on one particular supplier, and that supplier has the power to either, raise prices on you, and that's going to kill your business, or they run into problems and they can't supply your goods, and all of a sudden your business is impacted by that. That is a very risky situation. Okay, so by going through and diversifying, we are trying to de-risk the business. We want revenues coming in from as many sources as possible. We want to at least have some backup plans for suppliers. Maybe have a few in our pocket if problems arise. In terms of the financial end of things, de-risking can be important in terms of insurance, when it comes to, insuring the owners, dealing with shareholder agreements and buyouts. Insurance is also important, for if there's a disability or death of a particular shareholder. that can really cripple a business. Tax planning is important, obviously, because we want to minimize the amount of tax leakage in the business. And also, if we are going to do an eventual transition, especially if it's a third-party sale, there's some tax stuff that has to get done multiple years ahead of time. Can't be done at the last second, because the way the Canadian tax rules work is they will say you did that in anticipation of a sale, and therefore we're going to disallow it. Business succession planning is all about dealing with the 5 Ds. Okay? Death, disability, disagreement, disaster, and divorce. A good shareholder agreement should be in place, and it should address these things. A business operating system is important, because a business operating system is it's a method really for a business to how decision making is made, how communication is made throughout the organization, and it's because what's important is, strategy is coming from the top of an organization. So does that strategy filter its way down effectively through middle management to frontline employees, or does it get lost in translation along the way? Similarly, frontline employees, they're dealing with customers. They're probably getting some feedback from customers. Is any of that working its way up the organization? Because upper management can't strategize about something they don't know about, or if they have bad information. So to me, that's the purpose of a business operating system. So key performance indicators, monitoring systems are important, because we want to be able to, we want to have a system in place where we measure, we analyze, we make improvements, and then later on we measure again. We go through that process again. If you don't have KPIs, if you don't have monitoring systems, it's all going to be based on gut feels, and that's very difficult to improve the business. So by putting a system in place where we have KPIs, where we have monitoring systems, we're de-risking the business, because we're not flying blind. And then other things that we're concerned about on the risk side of things are operational efficiency. Do we have agility? Do we have the ability to deliver on promises we make to our customers? And what are some of the tools that we can use? Well, obviously, insurance, tax, estate planning is important. There are, entrepreneurial systems such as Scaling Up or Rockefeller Habits versus, say, EOS, and there's some other systems out there like that help to provide some what I would call organizational infrastructure. Things like Lean, Agile, Six Sigma get into the whole efficiency and waste and agility. IT infrastructure is incredibly important. So is cybersecurity, because again, especially if you're going to get into measuring KPIs and having monitoring systems, you need an IT system that allows you to do that. Going through a customer supplier diversification system, again, that may take a while to improve if you have a customer or supplier concentration problem. But again, as long as you're addressing it and improving it over time, then you can improve the business. But the most important thing really is the separation of the owner from the business. That's a human capital issue. And that would probably be, if that was like an issue in a business, that would be the number one thing to tackle. Certainly the biggest problem to tackle. So I'm going to leave it there today. So thanks very much for joining me. We're going to go a little bit more in depth in some of these drivers in the future, but I just wanted to kind of discuss them from a high level. Hope you enjoyed this presentation. Feel free to contact me at value@valorum.ca, and we'll see you next time.